All right, and we are back. Welcome into another episode of Keeping Up with the New York Jets, the NFL's premier reality drama series. Today is Wednesday, March 27th, officially 1 month away from the NFL draft. Alongside Teddy Pristash, I am Blake Pace. We've got a fun pod going on today. Going to talk about some of the news and notes coming out from the league's annual meeting that took place earlier this week. We heard from Woody Johnson. We heard from Joe Douglas. We heard from Robert Salah. We are then going to get into some rule changes that we had for the league as well, too. That'll be fun and exciting for this upcoming year. At least one is. The other is kind of a mixed bag of emotions. And then we're going to get into my big board, top 100 players dropping on my NFL draft newsletter. I will put some information at the end of this as well, too, or in the description where you are listening to this for the link to get on there. This pod will be dropping the same day the big board does. And we'll get into questions specifically related to the draft as it correlates with this big board as well, too. Theodore, we just spoke for 10 minutes like we always do before this. How are you?
Doing good, man. Doing good.
It's a weird thing to ask you how you're doing, as like we don't talk every day, or like
Yeah, that's
we
all
didn't
right.
talk for 10 minutes before, but it feels like it's like a obligation. Like, Theodore, chime in. How are things?
Yeah.
How's your life
Yeah.
going?
Yeah, maybe I'll just start jumping in a little sporadically
Cut me
every once in
off.
a while.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but no, doing good. We just had a little we have this like weird like back porch that we just keep stuff in, and just found out that like one of the windows was just like broken in half, and like half
Oh,
of it was just gone. Not shattered, but just kind of like broke down the middle. It was very odd. So yeah, I
interesting.
put up a paper like garbage can, I mean garbage bag, taped it up to
Nice.
block it for now, but a little interesting thing that just happened, right before we started this. But outside of that, man, I'm doing great, and excited to talk more Jets like we do.
Good, good. Quick question. This is very random. Have you ever had like, do you have bad allergies?
No, not
No.
really. Yeah.
Growing up in New York, I never had allergies. It was never an issue in my life, nothing at all. And living in Tennessee has completely changed me to where
Yeah.
like I never knew that I was like, oh, allergies
Your
don't
body's probably not
exist for
used to
me.
whatever's down there.
Something so weird that I didn't know was ever a side effect for allergies happened Sunday, and I've been dealing with it the last few days now. My ears are clogged.
Oh
Like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like they've got
yeah.
water in them. They won't
The
pop. And it's just
worst.
been like
The
3 days
worst.
straight where like I'm driving in the car and it's just like woo 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 woo, or like just woke. I was like, the fuck is this? I thought I was like, do I have an ear infection, whatnot? And then one of my employees today was talking and she was like, yeah, my ears are clogged up. It's stupid allergies. And I was like, oh, that's an allergies thing? Okay, cool. I'm not dying. So
I like how you get
that's
your medical advice from just like, oh yeah, my
from
employer's just saying something.
18 year olds. Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
That or
Well,
Google.
how brave is Blake right now,
Yep,
everybody? Just
yep.
just riding
Really
through the podcast
battling
with
through right now.
yeah, let's
Yep,
go.
yeah,
Proud of
yep,
you. Proud of
yep.
you.
You know who we're also proud of for battling through some things? Robert Saleh in that coach's picture. Let's start right there. The annual head coach's photo. Robert, he looked a little disheveled and not. It looked good. He's a well-built man, good-looking man, but he looks like he's had a lot of tread on the tracks these last 4 years being the head coach for the Jets. Didn't look necessarily
Yeah, I will
enthused to be
say,
there.
if you haven't looked at the picture, go do it now. The annual coaches picture they take every year. I mean, his eyes were shut. Like they
Yeah,
clearly just got a bad snap of him. When you take a picture with people, you usually, go through, make sure you pick one that everyone's eyes are open. So I got the bad luck of the draw there, which has become very memeable on Twitter and such. But
yeah.
I'm standing with my boy. I think he's all right.
How much paint do you think was put on that beard? That
I
is
don't know, man. The dude
jet
dyes his
black.
beard.
He must
I'm
have
cool with it
he
personally,
he
but it's jet black for
he
sure.
must have just filmed another Colgate commercial too, so the beard was all nice from that shoot that he must
Yeah,
have just
they
came
painted
from.
it up for him.
My dad dyes his beard, but he does the like touch of gray to make it be
Sure,
like,
yeah, yeah,
oh, look,
yeah.
I'm not really doing it. But
Had
then he doesn't understand
experience.
that like the hair on his head is like bleach white. So it's just like he
Yep,
looks like salt and
yep,
pepper. Whereas at least Salah
yeah,
can get away a little bit with just like no hair and then a jet black beard. But I mean, it's so obviously dyed, and it looks funny when every time it's like very freshly done for a photo op.
yeah,
Um,
for sure. You
That
know
that
he got
coach,
it done up for the league's meeting.
of course, yeah, that coach's picture is always so funny because there's always like two or three guys that I spent 5 minutes trying to figure out who Dennis Allen
Oh
was. Like I
yeah.
know Dennis Allen is
Yeah.
the coach of the Saints, but I was staring and I'm like, how do I not know this guy's face? And then it threw me off because he's wearing like the Panthers purple, but I was like, Canales is two over, so it's not the Panthers coach. I was just so confused. Some of those guys are just like some coaches are so
Yeah, it's a
noticeable, and then others you're just like, who the fuck is that?
an interesting group of men, the head coaches,
Yeah.
and them all getting together, and then just none of, a football head coach is not necessarily the most photogenic guy in the world,
No.
right? So
No.
putting 30 of them, I think a couple guys were missing, but
Yeah,
you
some
put
guys don't
30 of them in a
show.
picture together, um, it's always going to lead to some good laughs. So
Yeah,
so yeah, if you haven't,
best time of
go
year.
dive into that picture.
And then
Just
go
check it out because it's pretty
and
hilarious.
and also not that he needs any pub as well too, because he's one of the biggest names in the world. But Big Cat's blog, annual blog on the coaches,
Yeah,
is always
yeah.
like one of
Go
my
read his
favorite
blog.
reads of the year. It is so good.
Yeah, his
Um,
one blog a year.
so yeah, I wanted to start off hot with Salah's picture, but I actually we'll come back to some of his quotes and takeaways from his press conferences. I do want to start off with Woody Johnson, who we heard on Monday. After earlier this offseason, talking about and kind of not necessarily throwing Wilson under the bus, but he said that the Jets needed a backup quarterback. We didn't have one last year. Obviously, a little bit of a jab there. Came back and had another interesting quote to earlier this week. If we don't trade him, we're going to keep him. And then dove in a little bit more in depth. I'll read the full quote here. I feel badly about Zach in some ways because last year would have been great. It would have been the first time he could just sit back and watch a master at work, and he never had that. He's been in the fire from day one, and I think that's what he needs. He needs to be in a place where he can observe for a while. He's got the skill. He can do everything. There's a reason we drafted him number 2 overall, and I have great confidence that he'll get there at some point. That's all nice to say, but then to also go ahead and say that if they do not find a trade partner for him, that they will not cut him is insanity to me. So take me through your thoughts when you hear Woody Johnson kind of say this, because financially it doesn't make sense. And then also after all that we've had to deal with the last few years, it doubly doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'm happy we're bringing this up right away for a few reasons. If you can see, if anyone's watching the YouTube, I'm wearing my Zach Wilson jersey.
Oh,
You know,
nice
I
touch.
figured it would maybe be the last time I ever wear it.
Probably should be.
Because it's funny, because it's just like I'm so done talking about Zach Wilson, like I'm so ready to move into the Taylor era of the Jets being the backup quarterback and things like that. And like, don't get me wrong, I bought into the idea he could sit behind Rodgers last year once it happened, but up to that point, I was pretty open with us just cutting him last year.
Yeah.
Um, so you look to this year, and like if they cut him, that's cool with me. Obviously, you want to get something back, and they hope that some team wants to take a chance on him, but most of the reports that have been coming out basically just say there really hasn't been any interest. Shouldn't be all that surprising to us. I mean, we all watched him play. We all watched him really, really struggle despite maybe like two or three good flashes throughout the year. Um, and we've also heard the Jets brass, in Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh openly say that they're not done adding to this quarterback room. So when you look at it, that we have Aaron Rodgers, that we have Tyrod Taylor, a lot of people think we might draft a quarterback, Blake and I both being included in that. It just really makes zero sense to not cut Zach Wilson at that point. You know what I mean? Because what are you going to do? Have him be your fourth string receiver or fourth string quarterback? Um, so yeah, really interesting comment from Woody. I don't really think we need to take it all that seriously. My thought is that he's just trying to drum up some, noise. There's been a few kind of like unsubstantiated reports saying they've received offers but haven't gotten, a deal that they wanted that was good enough for them, which again, it's like, what could you be looking for? I mean, if a team offers you a seventh round pick, in my opinion, I think that's kind of a win at this point because you just got to cut your losses. But yeah, interesting quote from Woody. I'm not really sure how to read it, but if I'm putting my money down, I would say Zach Wilson probably doesn't get traded and he does get cut by the Jets. So,
Yeah.
interesting. Interesting from Woody there.
Yeah, I agree as well too. I don't see a world in which he is anywhere near this roster come the start of like training camp or the beginning of the regular season. We're in a world where Mac Jones was flipped for a sixth round pick to be the backup in Jacksonville. Justin Fields' trade market obviously was a slightly better, but still very low. And you can talk yourself into Justin Fields being a backup quarterback next year. He had moments where people thought that he was going to be a starting quarterback next year. Mac Jones, it seems more of like it's his hometown. You're really not giving up much. Bring him in to
They
be the
have an
backup
established
for
guy.
exactly an established guy. You also have to consider what's funny about this too is both of those guys were picked in the middle parts of round one. So their salaries are a little bit less. Zach Wilson is still carrying the final year of a number two overall pick. So not only are you bringing him in and you don't have the assurance that he's going to be a sound and secure backup quarterback, but then you also have to pay him pretty substantial money to be your third string quarterback and not be on the 53 to be the emergency quarterback at the end of the day. I don't see a world in which a trade package gets done. You see guys have flipped all over the place. Drew Lock is now in New York with the Giants. Sam Howell is now in Seattle with the Seahawks. Jesus. You've got all of these other guys that, you know, you're not going to have Zach Wilson back up your rookie quarterback if you're the Commanders and you draft, Drake May at number two, Drake May, and then the backup Zach Wilson. That's not a good fit. Like, there's just not a ton of spots right now. The Colts signed Joe Flacco to be their backup quarterback. The Raiders have Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. Every spot is filled really except for the Patriots and Commanders backup jobs or like the Vikings backup
Yeah,
job if they do
and
land a quarterback. There's just not a lot of room in the league right now for him.
sure, and you know, I really, at the end of the day, like Zach Wilson almost has to be a third string quarterback next year
100%.
because there's just no world where even a team who thinks, hey, let's take a chance on his upside, let's see if we can help him, let's see if we can get him on track. Like, you just saw him kind of be the number two option and be thrust in, and it clearly hasn't worked out for him with the Jets. And it's also like he's hurt a little bit by the fact that he's had to play, all throughout his 3 seasons in the NFL. You get to that point where you're a backup level quarterback and maybe you're not touching the field a ton. And those are the guys that seem to stick and last because they're able to just kind of say, like, hey, if I needed to play, I could. I just haven't needed to in a while. Teams don't, and how many times do you, like a Mason Rudolph, for example, you throw him in there for 3 or 4 games, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, this guy cannot be a backup anymore, and then maybe you wait a couple of years and it happens again. But playing has kind of hurt Zach Wilson because no team is going to trust him to be a number two guy. So he's going to have to be a number three guy. If the Jets did hold him and were like, he's our number three option, I wouldn't like in a vacuum think that's like the most insane thing because what number three option is going to be like this great player? And it's not like he'll be thrust in if there's an injury to year one and all these other things.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, the Jets have openly talked about wanting to add a young quarterback to try to develop, behind these two veterans that they've had. They've openly talked about wanting to add a guy. Jets fans seem to want that. It just doesn't make any sense for Zach Wilson to stick around to be a fourth stringer, because at that point you're not even going to make the practice squad. So yeah, real interesting quote from Woody. I feel like he's just trying to get some movement, but maybe he's pulling the strings behind the scenes, and if they don't get a deal, he's going to force them to stick around another year. And I think that would be dumb, but Woody Johnson has proven to make dumb decisions.
Yeah, and if it's a purely a money thing, I mean, we've heard before there rumblings about him not wanting to open up the book this past offseason with all the money they had committed to quarterback. I think he might have the mindset of if we're going to have to pay him regardless, then we're just going to keep him around. So it seems to
Sure.
be like that could be the one thing if he's pulling the strings as we had been told, financially he was at different times last season. This could be another example of that. Or that could, like you said, it could all just be a bunch of bullshit just to get people talking about Zach Wilson because it doesn't seem like anybody really has, and with good reason too. It's not like
Yeah.
there's a huge mark out there. The only we finished off last episode talking about how funny it would be if the Jets in round two could jump Denver to get Bo Nix away from Sean Payton, it would be almost as funny if Denver was like, we'll take Zach Wilson and
Yeah.
then turn Zach Wilson into, Jesus or something like that. Which is impossible, by the
Yeah,
way, but it would be funny.
it would be funny. I'm done talking about Zach Wilson for
Yep, let's
now.
move on. Joe Douglas gave a little bit of an update on his meeting in the Jets meeting with Jadeveon Clowney. It was a very productive visit, just him being around the building, getting a chance to know him, having brought in a few teammates that he played with last year that think the world of him. It was good to have him in. No news or updates on a signing. He said that the team will be ready to act, quote, if the opportunity presents itself. Jadeveon obviously talking about, or Douglas there talking about bringing in both Morgan Moses and John Simpson, former Ravens offensive linemen. Jadeveon, we had a good conversation with last week, would be a huge addition to the edge room and make it not one of the biggest needs heading into the draft. Still something they could do in the middle, late rounds, but right now we're sitting outside of O-line and wide receiver, looking at that as probably the biggest position of need, especially early on, since it's a premium position to add at. So I guess we're kind of in just wait and see mode as Jadeveon goes and visits with other teams.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say it kind of feels like we're in this weird like gray area where we did get the, benefit of having Joe Douglas give a press conference at these meetings, got to ask him about Jadeveon and how that meeting went. And, the update from him seemed very positive. It seemed like it went very well, all those things. But at the same time, it's almost like, what else is he going to say? You know?
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, to me, it very much just seems like it's a decision that's up to Clowney. Teams are going to make their offers. He's going to finish meeting with them and then kind of just make his decision from there. So yeah, I still am very hopeful that we get this done. I think it would be a great addition. I mean, we've talked about losing Bryce Huff and relying on these young edge players and, knowing that we want to have a rotation and all these things. Edge is something that we need to improve on for sure going into the season. I don't think we feel absolutely fantastic with just who we have on the roster now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't think this Joe Douglas quote really like gives us any new information, unfortunately.
No.
But it at least, sounds like it went well, and hopefully they can get something done because I think that'd be a big signing for him.
Yeah, and Salah, kind of furthered that same thought, saying the more the merrier when it comes to edge rushers. And Jadeveon with his visit didn't really provide much as well there too. But he did say as well that the Jets still are in current active talks with Corey Davis, since he has recently come out of retirement. Salah made it clear that the Jets would welcome back. Should he return to Florham Park? Also said that they're still in the markets right now and hoping to address both the safety and running back positions. So the full quote based on what they've done so far this free agency, it's given us a lot of flexibility with regard to the draft. So still a lot of work to do, a lot of things we still need to accomplish. Good so far. Winning doesn't Winning off season doesn't matter. You have to win football games, which is what we have been saying for the last month and what we have been arguing for now. It's been fun to win the off season. We can be excited about all these signings, but it's good to know that Robert Saleh also feels the same way, that it's cool to be excited about Mike Williams and Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses trade and John Simpson, but they have to win football games. So that was really the biggest thing I took away from everything Saleh had to say. Um, when you take a look at the safety room in free agency, there's still a lot of really strong names that haven't signed. You've got Justin Simmons over with Denver, who is, I mean, one of the best safeties in football. So he's probably waiting around for the money to come talking. You've still got, a guy like Quandre Diggs from Seattle, who's really good. Still, 31, so got a lot of football left in his game. Comes from the same base scheme too, so that'd be a good fit there. I know he was also talking and meeting with the Colts recently, but a whole bunch of other guys.
Marcus
Micah
May
Hyde.
still
I was
available?
just about to say you've got the old tandem. You could bring back both Jamal and Marcus May if you wanted. Bring back the boys.
Yeah, not
Get
Jamal,
them
but maybe
buzzing.
Marcus.
Kareem Jackson from Houston to Sean Gibson. It's the safety market. It's surprising because, and there have been a few names that have signed big contracts as well too. Xavier McKinney took a big deal with Green Bay. There's been other ones as well, but the draft is not safety heavy. So it's interesting to see that people aren't just waiting for the draft and then filling it out. I'm surprised that there haven't been more signings made with some of these guys, knowing the fact that you're not going to find a starting safety anywhere in this draft outside of maybe Tyler Nubin from Minnesota. So, any thoughts on the safety, running back room, Corey Davis, anything Robert Saleh had to offer us this week?
No, I mean, not really surprising. I think, obviously it's good to know that they don't see what they've done as just like, okay, we're good. Let's just go into the year, we'll get through the draft. I also think like, looking at like the Jets draft picks, we talked about this a little last year, and there's obviously that potential for trades and stuff. But right now, our first four draft picks are 10 and then 72, 111, 135. 2 years ago, or maybe last year, whenever it was, 2 years ago, I think we're sitting here, talking about the Jets have six picks in the top 100, three picks in the top 35. Like, those were really like heavy draft pick years for us where we felt that we had that ability to like add these game changers in the draft, and even though they're rookies and it's hard to rely on, you still have some type of belief in them, I guess, if they're that highly drafted. This year, outside of 10 and then maybe that third round pick, you're not really thinking you're going to get these like day one starters or day one
Impact
players.
players.
So, it's just important. And obviously, like right now, it does feel like we have our starters at the safety room. Obviously, we have Brees Hall as our starting running back. But just adding depth to those positions is obviously something that's needed. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where they go. But yeah, like you said, the safeties, pretty good names on that list.
Hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see what they can get done there. In terms of running backs, I mean, really, in my opinion, like free agency running backs, like just get a guy who's like decent and
Yep.
they're a dime a dozen in the league, it seems. And when you have a Brees and you have a Bonaconda is kind of a young guy you're hoping breaks out, I think really you could just add basically anyone and it'll be all right.
Yeah, I'd rather go power with that other running back as well too. Maybe if there's Ezekiel Elliott is
Zeke,
a
yeah.
powerful guy. He's got some, pop that he throws. Latavius Murray does as well too. Kind of just your physical between the tackles, dude. I'm not really too interested in the shifty Cam Akers or Clyde Edwards-Helaire or, God forbid J.K. Dobbins is a, lightning in a bottle, but who knows if he's going to be, he was cleared as of today when we're recording this to resume football activities, which is great, but he's
Oh, good
also
for him.
had 2 or 3 years now of serious injuries. So that's a name I'm not looking at too much. Yeah, you're right. It's not a ton of guys. You also had recently Damian Harris announce his retirement from football. So the list is
Yeah.
shrinking.
We'll
Um,
probably sign Latavius Murray or some
yeah,
random old
Latavius would be
ass guy
cool.
like that. You
Latavius,
know,
Zeke, I wouldn't hate either of those. I mean, they got to know that they're coming in for a rotational role and just kind of put a
sure.
little bit of power and thunder to the lightning on the other two guys. But Brees can do both of that too, so it's not like you desperately need to cover up that hole as well.
Yeah.
Um, Corey Davis still an option, which
Yeah,
to
this
me,
this is really interesting to me because, we designated him to return and then, I'm not fully sure of like the rules. I was under the impression we had rights to his another
they
year of
granted
his
him his
contract.
release. They granted him his
Sure,
release.
yes.
Yeah,
Okay, that's what I thought. So
they
they
didn't have
agreed
to.
to release him, which obviously, on one aspect you can say, okay, well that maybe makes it seem like he doesn't want to come back or they might not be as interested. But then there's also that play of, we were paying him a decent chunk of change. Now it kind of gets thrown out and maybe they'll resign him at a lesser deal, something like that. But interesting to me because it does feel like if his plan was to come back and play for the Jets immediately, that seems like something that would have gotten done quicker, I guess. So part of me, whether it's the Jets not believing in him as much and wanting to pay him as much, or him just not wanting to come back and wanting a fresh start elsewhere, like I'm not really sure. But it does seem a little odd to me that like if it was going to be the Jets, I kind of feel like it would have gotten done already.
Yeah, he could just be feeling out the market and seeing where he wants to go.
Sure.
There's also he lives in Tennessee. That was where he was drafted, so maybe he wants to be a little bit closer to home. He did mention that at times as well too. It was tough being further away.
Yeah.
When we talk about fit with the Jets, I mean, you slide him into the slot, and all of a sudden, we don't ever need to see Alan Lazard on a football field next year, right? It's one of those situations where he's such a good skill set for the inside. I think he's had to
Yeah.
play both at different times with his Jets tenure because he was needed to. But if you can just have him line up in that slot role, there's no need to go grab an OBJ or a guy in the draft early on. You have a set of receivers there, Garrett Wilson, Mike Williams, and Corey Davis. I mean, if you're telling me that our backups are going to be start with Alan Lazard, perfectly fine with that. It sounds like a pretty good
Yeah,
idea.
no, it's just a another solid guy, wide receiver 3 or 4 that, in my opinion, you can kind of trust. I know he's
Third
had
down,
some
Corey
drop
Davis.
issues with the Jets, but
Yeah.
he also makes a lot of big plays when you need him.
Hmm.
And I think especially working with a guy like Rodgers who can just appreciate that veteran kind of aspect to it.
Yeah.
Obviously, a year out of football, we'll hope that things didn't fall off if we were to sign him. But yeah, I'd be super open to bringing him back in and kind of shoring up that room in that way.
Yeah, be cool to see how that all fills out. Also, receiver is probably a position now where outside, all the bigger names have landed, so you probably wait until after the draft to see who couldn't address a slot and get a guy like
Sure.
OBJ or Corey
Yeah.
Davis. It does
Yeah.
feel like free agency has hit that like, okay, we're done now outside of safety probably would be my
Is
one thing.
Boyd still available?
Yeah, he should be. Yeah, I don't think he signed anywhere.
Interesting. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see where he goes.
Yeah, nope. So I guess he's still available as well too, but I mean, yeah, interesting. Steelers
Indeed.
are still in on him, but seems to be mum on all other teams that are interested. Um, outside of that, I think what came out big from the league meetings this year are a couple of rule changes. One, that I think is going to be a headache to deal with next year is the banning of a hip drop tackle, which
Yeah.
defenders have come out a lot and been like, what do you want us to do? Especially the vocal ones that you see on, social media a lot, like a Will Compton or a JJ Watt. Like JJ Watt was like, what is a hip drop tackle? Like he didn't know he was doing one. And all of a sudden now it's
Yeah.
this banned move. Take me through your mind as a former defensive player, as a former safety.
Sure. Sure.
Take me through the lens of what this rule is going to have an impact on next year.
No, yeah, I mean, it's been talked about, right? Like all off season, people have been thinking this would be a rule change. I was really
Yeah.
hoping that it would have, gotten denied, and
Mm-hmm.
that didn't happen.
Unanimously
Um,
approved.
yeah, and it's this weird thing, and I'll throw a little love again to our barstool boys. Mark Titus, kind of had the take of like sometimes you can, if someone says this is a hip drop tackle, this is what's illegal. You can kind of look at it and be like, yeah, all right, like that kind of makes sense why you would want that to not be illegal. A lot of times you're basically just dropping your body and it's going right on the, you know, offensive players' legs and can hurt their ankles and twist their knees and all that stuff. So you kind of understand like the dangerous side of it. The problem with a hip drop tackle is exactly what you just said, where it's not even really like players aren't trying to tackle with like that certain technique. It's almost just happening, And like my interpretation of what a hip drop tackle is, and I don't know how to explain it, so I would just urge anyone to just like go look up videos if you don't know. But it basically is just like anytime a player is in front of you, running away from you, and
Yeah.
you try to
When
grab
you're
them and then
chasing down a
fall to
defender.
tackle them,
Yeah.
that can be considered a hip drop tackle. So it's like this really it'll be very interesting to see, how it goes and if it turns into one of these things where they'll need to address it right away in the next offseason and change the rule
Yeah.
or what, because to me it seems like there's going to be tons of times where like players aren't remotely trying for that to happen, but then it will. Because again, it seems just like any time a player is an offensive player is kind of running away past you, it's kind of your only option to tackle them,
Right.
right? You
You
have
have
to get
to
them on the ground, so you have to grab them and
exactly.
then bring yourself to the ground. So yeah, I do not know how that's going to go. Not a big fan of the rule change, and especially when you have like so many former players like just actively talk against it and current players as well. Um, I'm not really, like I can get behind like the targeting things, the dropping your head. Like
Yep.
people get up in arms about those a lot, but I think those are pretty clear. Like if a player drops and leads with the ground of their head, it's a penalty. If they keep their head
Dangerous.
up, it's not. The hip drop tackle doesn't have those like defined black and white guidelines. And, when the league comes out with a video saying these are the tackles, it almost kind of feels like, okay, well, how different are those than some other tackles you know. So yeah, that kind of sucks. I don't know.
Yeah, it's gonna be so tough for referees, like even just outside of the players having to stop, for the referees to be like, that was undoubtedly a hip drop tackle, where it's like you're watching everything happen in an instant. It's almost like a block versus charge in the NBA. Like sometimes
Sure.
you're gonna get those wrong repeatedly. So
It's
there's gonna be
bang
plenty of
bang, yeah.
times where you're just like, well, they completely missed on that. Oh, they missed it again. Oh, that one should have been a hip drop tackle, but I think they got in their head too much about how the first two were bad. It's just I think
Yeah.
you're doing the right thing looking out for players and their safety, but you're almost doing too much and overcomplicating the game now. It's a physical game. You want to eliminate lower body injuries, you want to eliminate, head injuries, but now you're almost telling defenders that there's not really like you said, if a guy is running to the end zone and you are behind him, you almost have to just like let him go at that point.
Yeah.
Like you just be like, "Oh, oops, sorry, you got past me. It's over."
It almost just brings up like the NFL has trouble defining it, right? Like there hasn't been like a this is a hip drop tackle, these three bullet points, you know,
Yep.
like it's not something that can be like easily explained. So how can it be easily refed almost,
It's
you know?
yeah.
So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I guess it's not surprising, like people have been preparing for this. Um, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that kind of comes to fruition in actual gameplay and refs throwing flags and things like that because it's just odd to me, very
Yep.
odd. I didn't
100%.
even know what a hip drop tackle was until last
No,
year when they started. People
really
started,
the Mark Andrews one was the one where everybody was
yeah,
like, "Oh, I see
and
what
I
happened there."
think they just call it a hip drop tackle and then hope people just use those two words to like
Yep.
understand what it means, and it's like, but
What
what
about
does
it?
it mean? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, so yeah, very
It's
odd.
just it's gonna be a headache all next season, and then it'll probably get to this point next year, and they'll have to be like, okay, well now we're gonna make it reviewable, and that's gonna lengthen like 20 minutes of game time each year. So it's just
Yeah,
like it's
and
gonna
we know
be
how
this
that
ongoing
goes.
headache.
Yeah.
Um, so that'll be a pain in the ass. But at least the fun part that came out is we've got a new kickoff rule. It's gonna follow in line with the XFL, what they've been doing the last few years. I'm a big draft guy. Teddy's a big XFL guy, so I've
Yep.
watched the kickoffs. I think they're fun as fuck. Take me through what this is going to bring to the game next year, because I think it's
Yeah, sure. Did you have
I just think it's awesome. It's an awesome addition.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, people are definitely going to be hesitant to this and be like, what is this for sure? I watched the XFL a ton last year. I consider myself one of the bigger XFL fans there is. Now the UFL, after they
Right.
merged with the USFL, starting this Saturday. I'm actually very
Oh, that's
excited.
cool.
Um, but yeah, so basically, you know, instead of lining up where they normally would and um you know, the kickoff team having a running head start and the coverage team kind of dropping back and then blocking. Basically, the coverage team and the kickoff team both line up a lot closer to the actual returners. They can't move, or at least the coverage team can't move until the ball is caught by the um, receivers, the returners, or the ball hits the ground. And basically, the play starts from there. And the interesting part about it is the 0 through the 20 is the landing zone for the kickers. So that's where they're aiming the ball to go. If they kick the ball straight through into the end zone or out the back of the end zone, the receiving team will be rewarded with the ball in the 30. If they kick it into the landing zone and then it bounces out of the end zone, they kind of just call that null and they get the ball starting at the 20. Um, so this is actually a really awesome rule, in my opinion. When I was
Hmm.
watching, you know, the XFL and these spring leagues, I think one of the better things from it is they kind of get to experiment rules that the NFL
Hmm.
can then look to and say, okay, how did this work? And this was something watching last season, like I immediately was like, this is awesome and could be brought into the NFL game. You think about what they've tried to do with kickoffs, right? And basically, very early on in the concussion, you know, uprising and wanting to increase player safety, try to decrease, you know, head injuries, all that stuff. They identified kickoffs as one of the bigger causes of that, basically because the return team has just this running head start of like 60 yards, and you have the coverage team running backwards and trying to block them, and it can lead to a lot of injuries. So the NFL tried to adjust that by moving up the kickoff. And what that did is basically take returns out of the game, right? You'd watch a football game and there'd be maybe one or two kick returns. 90% of kicks were touchbacks out of the end zone. And it kind of just put us in this place of like, what even is the point of doing the kickoffs if we're just going to kick it out of the end zone and put the ball in the 25? What I love about this rule is it incentivizes returns, right? The kicking team is basically by rule needs to try to get the ball in play between the 0 and 20, but it also takes off like decreases the danger of the kickoff, because the players are starting a lot more close together. They can't move. They can't get the same type of running head start. So you're decreasing, injury risk while also incentivizing returns and getting more returns that are more exciting for the game. So definitely something people will have to get used to, but in my opinion, an awesome, awesome rule that's just going to be more fun because we get to see more kick returns, which is something we've kind of lost over the past 10 years.
Yeah, it won't take long for people to get on board with this once they watch it. I mean, the first one even they're
Yeah,
going to be excited about and be like, it might be like, wait, so what are the rules again? You might have to refresh yourself a few times about it, but
sure.
just the fact, I mean, it was basically a part of football that went extinct. And like you said, the last few years you watch all these kickoffs and it's like, we really need to do this?
Right.
Should we just put the ball on the 20 or the 25 and just start it and let it rip? Um, this is just the best solution because you keep that a part of the game. But you modify it to like you're saying, you're incentivized to actually return the football. We're going to get really cool returns and highlight plays from it as well too. Um, it's going to make the punt returner, kick returner job that much more important as well too. You used to be able to just be like,
Fair
I'm going to
point.
take I'm going to put on my fourth or sixth wide receiver there as the punt returner. You're probably going to get some higher leverage players to take on a position like that. Like I saw Connor Rogers tweet and he was like, imagine Brees Hall being the returner. Not that obviously you're going to
Yeah.
put a guy back there that means that much to the team, but like you're going to want an impact player back there because it is now back to being a dangerous position or a dangerous potential play where you can rip off and start at your 45 or your 50. It's going to add a lot more back into a part of football that went extinct, so I'm all about it. I've only watched it a few times. I haven't been the biggest XFL guy, but every time I've done it, I'm like, why is it taking so long to get this to the NFL? I
Yeah.
also think there's other rules eventually, like getting rid of the onside kick and doing what the XFL does. Like, there's so many different things that I'm like, it's okay to admit that somebody else has found a better solution. Just go take it and bring it in. Like, there's no point in not doing it.
Yeah. And we don't have to dive fully into the onside kick thing because I think that is an interesting one because I don't know how much I love the just like running a
Yeah,
play and it's like
I
fourth
think
and
it's cool.
20 or whatever it
I think it's
is.
sick.
I think it's cool too. A part of like the football purist in me is just like that's not what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting point to bring up because this XFL or this new rule change does change, the way onside kicks work because
Oh,
basically,
yeah.
the rules are you need to kick the ball into the landing zone. So it takes away the onside kick, right? Because your players aren't standing there anymore. So
Right.
now if an NFL team wants to do an onside kick, they need to declare it basically before the
Oh,
play, and then they go out
interesting.
in
Think about
normal,
that.
OG onside kick hands team for the coverage team and go from there. So the
So
one thing
you're
it does.
you're telling me that the Colts would have had a better chance winning the Super Bowl in 2009 if this rule
Right,
existed then?
exactly. The big, thing that immediately comes to mind is the surprise onside kick is now impossible,
Hmm.
which is interesting. I mean, onside kicks are so, so, so unsuccessful
That's
anyway.
the thing. It's
And like, when
impossible.
was the last surprise onside kick that you really saw, So, that's just something you lose is that, but at the same time, like that wasn't a play that was succeeding, even at like a 1% rate, it was lower than that. So, yeah, that's the only kind of like iffy, like, all right, we'll see how that goes. But maybe they do in the future change that rule up to some of the things people have been kind of throwing out there. But yeah, no, I think this kickoff rule is going to be awesome. I think it's going to make the NFL more fun. I think people are going to, complain about the rule at first just because it's different, but eventually be like, okay, yeah, this is a really great idea. So
Hmm. Very fun. At least we've got that to be happy about after the hip drop rule. We can kind of at least be like, all right, we
yeah,
got something cool out of this. Any
Sure.
more from the annual league meetings? Anything you want to talk about? Or you want to get into some draft stuff to finish this pod off?
I don't think so. Yeah, let's draft it up.
Let's do it. So yeah, for those who might be listening for the first time, or just for me to say it again, this is my third year doing it now. Got a NFL draft newsletter. I missed last year, but I did the 2 years beforehand. Basically, I try and get three-ish, maybe some weeks more, some weeks less, pieces out a week to an email mailing list. Like I said, I'll put the link in the descriptions for both the YouTube and the podcast feeds if you do want to join in and sign up. Emails get sent out. It is a range of preliminary profiles right now, mock drafts, big boards, and at the end there will be a big PDF that has full scouting profiles for what will probably end up being 150 players for this draft class. It will have a final mock draft, a final big board, player comps, player grades. That is all probably going to come out maybe a week before the draft, so a couple weeks from now. So if you'd rather just get on that and not the newsletter, that's fine. But there is still some stuff that'll come out between now and then. And today, when this podcast drops, my top 100 players is coming out as well too. So we thought it'd be a good time to take a look at this list and go through it and see how it relates to the Jets. I thought one thing we could at least start off, and Teddy had this good idea, was kind of just listing maybe the top crop of players that I've got in this draft. I don't know if there was a certain cutoff point you wanted me to do, but at least to get people familiarized with who I guess where I stack up my top section of players.
Yeah, I mean, so basically what I think how we're going to start this conversation is essentially, kind of take a look at the top of your big board and then kind of just talk about a couple different possibilities with, these top 10 picks because kind of an underrated or maybe not underrated, but something I don't always think about immediately. Who's going to be available at 10 is very dependent on where all these other guys go, in the first
Mhm.
nine picks, right?
Yeah,
And you can get some crazy things that maybe push a couple guys down that you want. So yeah, I was thinking maybe you could just kind of give us your top 15, 16 guys.
yeah.
And then, we can just kind of dive into some questions that I prepared for you.
Definitely. Yeah. So I'll start off and I'll section this off with my top seven and then the group below because to me, the seven is my first tier of like blue chip players in this draft. And so my top two are wide receivers, Marvin Harrison Jr. out of Ohio State, Malik Neighbors, wide receiver out of LSU. Then I get into Caleb Williams, my number three overall player out of USC. First tackle here is my fourth guy, Joe Alt from Notre Dame. Number five is Brock Bowers, the tight end from Georgia. Number six, Drake May, quarterback, North Carolina. Big fan of his. And then seventh and final one in that spot is Roma Dunze, wide receiver out of Washington. So that top seven, all offensive heavy. You got wide receivers, two quarterbacks, a tackle, and tight end. And then to round out, I guess, down to the top 15, because it'll include some other positions as well, too. I've got at 8, Olofushanu, offensive tackle from Penn State. Number 9 is Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver from LSU. First defensive player on the board at 10, Quinyon Mitchell, the cornerback from Toledo. And then we've got a couple offensive linemen at 11 and 12, Troy Fautanu, the offensive lineman from Washington, Talisia Fuanga, offensive tackle from Oregon State at number 12. Got Johnny Newton, defensive tackle from Illinois at 13. White boy Cooper DeJean, the cornerback from Iowa at 14. And to finish it out at 15, my top edge in this class, not by much, but Dallas Turner from Alabama. So that's the top 15 there. I definitely think there's a top crop at 7 and then a drop off, but it's a really
Sure.
strong class, really deep. Last year and the year before was lacking a lot at certain key positions. I think there's depth at offensive line, quarterback, wide receiver. Edge has some value there. It's a little thin at linebacker, safety, tight end a little bit, but overall, really strong class, especially at the top, but then depth at some key positions too.
Yeah, and I think just main takeaways from your list there, like it hasn't been a secret, right, that most people think the Jets are going to be going with an offensive tackle or a wide receiver with their first pick. Also,
Hmm.
hasn't been a secret that this is a draft that has very deep classes in both those positions.
Yeah.
And I mean, just looking at your top 15, you have four wide receivers in your top nine guys, um, and then four offensive tackles in your top 12. So that bodes well for the Jets, I think.
Hmm.
And, the first place I really want to start this conversation is kind of where I think the draft always starts, and that is, with these quarterbacks. I think it's interesting looking at your big board, which is obviously not where you think players are going to be drafted, but just kind of how you rank them. You have two quarterbacks in your top, 25. You have Jaden Daniels at 26, then Bo Nix at 29, JJ McCarthy and Michael Penix at 35, 36. Um, I think it's pretty, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, right? But the whole world knows the Bears are going to be picking Caleb Williams at 1,
Yep.
right? Number 2 seems like it's going to be Drake May or Jaden Daniels. Am I correct
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, definitely. I think the big thing right now with number two, especially, is that I think you're hearing everything but Drake May to the Commanders. You're hearing a lot of
Which
Jaden
almost
Daniels. You heard earlier this week, JJ McCarthy. Don't be surprised if he goes number two. The only guy you're not hearing is Drake May. And this is a new owner, GM, coach here in Washington. To me, they're keeping this thing quiet. I think it goes Drake May. Could be Jaden. There's a lot of, push for him to be that guy, but I think when you hear so much connecting one guy to a team, it never ends up being that way. Um, Outside of, it being the number one guy like Caleb Williams to Chicago. But yeah, I do think at the end of the day, it'll be Drake May two to the Commanders.
Sure. So yeah, so at this point, and I think the Patriots are at 3, right? So I
Yeah.
think they have this potential to kind of throw a wrench in things if they get a little weird. But I think general consensus is that the first 3 picks will be 3 quarterbacks. No.
Yep. Hmm.
And even if it's not the Patriots making that pick, perhaps they trade it.
Right.
But that's 3 quarterbacks right there, right? And that pushes everybody else down, a couple pegs when you think about who's going to be there at 10. So I think my starting point is, does a fourth quarterback go in the top 10? Is that something you see happening? This past week, JJ McCarthy has gotten a ton of steam. You've seen his betting odds to be the number 2 pick skyrocket from, I think, 1,100 to plus 400. Very divisive player. You got Harbaugh coming out saying he's better than all the other guys in the draft. You got, I don't know, like to me, McCarthy just seems like a guy, maybe just because he's white and small and went to
Hmm.
Michigan. I just don't like give him much
Yeah.
action, but it seems like there is that possibility, right? That someone maybe takes a chance, and maybe if it's not him, maybe on another quarterback. I don't know. But I guess I just want to hear your thoughts. Do you think a fourth quarterback goes in the top 10? And would that be JJ McCarthy in your mind?
Yeah, I think it'd be JJ just because outside of like Michael Penix and Bo Nix, who are both like fifth or sixth year starters, you know what they are basically. Like, sure, they could take a step above at the next level, but with JJ, you're drafting a guy that is like freshly 21. He ran a very pro style offense in college, and NFL coaches are sort of coming obsessed with the idea of having a quarterback that just like listens to the play caller. Kyle Shanahan loves Brock Purdy because he's got a solid arm, really high IQ, and just listens to what Kyle wants him to do. McDaniel does the same thing with Tua down in Miami. There could be those teams, and when I think of teams for JJ, like Brian Dable and the Giants have gotten John Mara's blessing to get the Daniel Jones replacement and trade up if they can do so. So to me, would Dable want to have that same type of like, here's a guy that will just listen to me and what I want him to do within the offense? Kevin Stefanski, or no, not Kevin Stefanski, Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota. That would be another guy where I'm like, he would want that same operation, kind of like how Kirk Cousins was for him, but at least you're attaching yourself to a younger guy that you can kind of develop further. Those would be the two teams that I would be like, okay, I could see JJ going there in the top 10, but there is a little bit of worry, like not worry, but last year we heard Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, and Will Levis. And what happened? Three went in the top four, and then Will Levis was a second round
Sure.
pick. Like sometimes you
Yep.
just push up another name so much just to keep everybody on their toes, and then that fourth guy doesn't get touched. So I think people will. If I had to bet right now, I do think JJ will go in the top 10, especially if New England stays at 3. But if New England trades out of the third pick and Minnesota or the Giants or whoever else could be there move up to take a quarterback and New England drops back, that's where I'd be like, okay, maybe JJ is is the Will Levis, and maybe he could be
Sure.
something, but maybe he's worth more of an early second round pick as opposed to being a top 10 one. So, um, I think you're right. It all hinges on what New England does. If they take Jaden Daniels, someone's going to probably come up for McCarthy at that point because you know that you're fighting between the Giants or Minnesota. So it'll
Yeah.
be, and you know, you have wild cards too. There could always be like a Denver, Vegas, but Minnesota definitely. After Minnesota traded for the 23rd overall pick, that was basically a move saying we're going to use these two picks to get somewhere in the top 10 for a quarterback. So at some point, Minnesota will make a jump. Will it be for the third or the fourth quarterback? Kind of depends on what New England does.
Yeah. Yeah. And so while the Jets not in, the quarterback market in this draft for
Hmm.
these top picks, that's a big thing, right? Because it's going to push down these other players and potentially change what the Jets do at 10.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's kind of what I want to get into next is I guess, we've talked about the idea of a trade back, right? And I don't think really there's a world where anyone's that opposed to trading back, trying to still pick up a solid player in the first somewhere, and then, recouping maybe a second round pick or something like that, get some more kind of bullets. I guess my question to you, and we can start with tackle and then go into wide receiver, is are there certain names there that if are available, kind of erases your hope for a trade back and just says, just go get your guy. So, with offensive tackle,
Hmm.
like we said, you had Joe Alt ranked at 4, Fashanu at 8, and then Fatanu, sorry if I'm
Yeah.
saying that wrong,
No,
and
you got it.
Fuaga at 11 and 12. You know, does one of those guys need to be there for you to say, hey, go ahead and make this pick? If Fatanu and Fuaga are both sitting there, are you comfortable with that pick? Would you prefer a trade back? From a tackle perspective,
Yeah.
what is your thoughts with those four guys? Assuming maybe we don't get the top two, are either 3 or 4, hey, just go take your pick and get your guy. Would you want one of the top two? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's funny because like if Joe Wald is there at 10, I almost like
Sure.
cut Tyrone Smith and I just play Joe Wald from day one. He's a day one, like undoubtedly like stud left tackle. So we're under the assumption that he probably won't be there at 10. But if he is, I'd cut Tyrone Smith. I'd say thank you. Maybe be a
Yeah,
bench
or
guy so
more
we don't have to pay the
realistically, just
incentives.
draft him and deal with him
Yeah,
having to be on the bench,
true.
or you know what I mean, or figure it out from
Yeah,
there.
right.
Like,
Yes, exactly. I like Olu. I almost though to me at that point where it gets weird with the big board with the Jets where I almost want a guy like Troy Fautanu in because not only is he projecting as your eventual left tackle, but he comes in day one and is competing with John Simpson for that left guard position. And competition just rises the cream to the top. And what is that? Rises the
cream,
cream rises to
cream
the
rises to
something.
the top.
Is that what it is? Is it cream? I don't know if it's cream.
Yeah, it's cream.
Whatever it is. Fautanu can play four positions. He can be left tackle, left guard, right tackle. Like he is starter day one at any of those positions. And I still am fine going with that if he is your bench guy, because if a guy goes down at any position or isn't performing, you can slide him right in there and be the starter while also knowing he projects pretty well as your future left tackle when the time comes that Tyrone Smith or even Morgan Moses at right tackle kind of fall off or get older or head back into free agency. So I really like Fautanu for that fit. Um, Fashanu's a tackle, so you really have to just kind of hold on to him as insurance moving forward when those aging positions come. Um, the thing is, to me, if three of those guys are there, if you're sitting at 10 and it's Fashanu, Fautanu, and Fuaga, talk about names as well too there. I almost don't hate the idea of trading back just because
You hope you can get one of those guys a
and
little
it's
later.
risky to do that, but the odds of all three going by say Indianapolis wants to come up and take, Brock Bowers at tight end, or they want to get Quinion Mitchell, the top corner in this draft, and they know they have to jump a few teams like Vegas or Denver to do so. The Jets and Colts could flip those picks, and at 15, you're like, okay, we really didn't move down too far, and we'd really need something crazy to happen for three offensive linemen to go back to back to back at that spot. So you do run the risk of it, and there is a little bit of a drop off after those three to me. Then you get into Jackson Powers Johnson, who's really just a guard and center. And you already kind of invested early picks in AVT and Joe Tippmann. So do you really want to go back into the inside game? Not really. Armarius Mims is a really fun physical tackle. Could play right or left and is just like mean. You know, him learning behind Morgan Moses and Tyron Smith would be really fun. So maybe if you trade a little bit back further than 15, I'd be all right with him. But if those three are there, I'm fine moving back, but I also wouldn't hate them also taking, the versatile guys like Fautanu and Fuaga. I sound
Sure.
anti Fashanu there, but I just I like the idea of position flexibility when
Yeah.
you're the Jets and you've dealt with so many injuries and poor performance the last few years along the offensive line. I want a guy that can fill in anywhere and be good, kind of like AVT is.
Yeah, I mean, you've almost sold me. I'm in on Fatanu pretty big now. So thank you. Um,
He was a late riser too. I think he was a big guy. I don't know if he was Senior Bowl, but it was like the stock just like kept going and going and going, and all of a sudden he's in there. Like he should be a top 15 pick. It depends, I
yeah.
guess, how it all shakes out. But I'd be surprised if he wasn't.
Yeah, that'll be interesting, especially I think with these tackles. I agree with you. I think Alt will probably go before the Jets just because
Just
I think
sad.
he's the
He's
clear
unreal.
best player. Um, but yeah, then it gets into, are all three of the next guys going to be available? Is just one? Is just two? And that really, I think, dictates if the Jets are looking at that position, where they're going to go. So, switching to receiver here, which I
Hmm.
think again, very similar. And these you have four in your top nine, right? You have Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors as one and two. Rome Odunze is your seventh guy, kind of at the end of that, first top tier break. And then you have Brian Thomas Jr. in your top 10 as well. So, I guess for the sake of this argument, maybe we'll take out the tackles a little bit, or we'll assume maybe two of them have gone to push some of these other guys down. I guess, where on your list of four guys, or is it all four, where if any of them are available at 10 and, it seems for whatever reason the Jets aren't going tackle, would you want them to just pull trigger on one of these guys? I guess starting with Brian Thomas as the lowest guy you have ranked in your top 10, but then up to Dunze and maybe Neighbors, which I think would be crazy. But
Hmm.
are there of those four guys, is there a clear line where you're like, if this guy's available, go take him? If not, maybe wait it out and look elsewhere? Or what do you think when you think about those four names?
Yeah, to me, and we've talked about this too, filling out the wide receiver room. I want a diverse skill set. And to me, the only one that just brings something we already have a lot of is Brian Thomas Jr. He's just your pure vertical threat, and he's a great one at that. But when you go and you bring in a Mike Williams who provides a lot of that, when you have an Alan Lazard, I just don't know, you might have too many guys doing the same thing. He reminds me of like a healthier Christian Watson at times in Green Bay. Doesn't have any hamstring issues, so you know that he does have game changing ability there. Where you've seen Watson have these games where it's just like, oh, he's open deep again, and Brian Thomas will do that. But I do think that the Jets already have that role filled. Now it's the same situation where Lazard was really bad and Mike Williams is coming off of an ACL injury, so maybe you're fine doing that and just saying we want a playmaker opposite Garrett Wilson. So we're just going to try a bunch of dudes and hope that one sticks. But you definitely take it if it's Malik Neighbors. You definitely take it if it's Roma Dunze. Roma Dunze kind of feels like, and I said this in my recent wide receiver piece that came out earlier this week. He just like reminds me of DeAndre Hopkins, where he doesn't he's not like a freak show athlete, but he always makes a play. He doesn't have the top end speed or the perfect route running. He's just out there smooth, and all of a sudden the ball's in his hands and he's making plays. Like he's the guy that of this class, you're like, I need this dude to make a play on third down. You're gonna throw to him, just like you would a DeAndre Hopkins. Like the skill set, there isn't like one thing that I'm like, wow, he's exceptional at this, but everything just forms together to be a really great wide receiver. And then Neighbors is special. He's like he's a guy that, and this is crazy to say because of how much I do I love Garrett Wilson, but like Garrett Wilson would almost be a number two to a guy like Malik Neighbors. Eventually, maybe
Damn,
not day one,
that's
but
fucked up.
he is like I've said this. I think if he wasn't in the same class as Marvin Harrison, he'd be the best player. Obviously, I have him number two, but he'd
Sure.
also be like the best wide receiver prospect since like Amari Cooper a decade ago that was like undoubtedly you got to take this guy in the top 10. Like Malik Neighbors can have a Jamar Chase type effect for a franchise, which
Sure.
is a high expectation to put on a guy, but that's the skill set where he's just going to day one be your alpha. Um, and then that's also, if you hear me say that, that's how highly I think of Marvin Harrison Jr. because he's better than Malik Neighbors. So
Yeah.
it's crazy at that top three, especially the top two. Brian Thomas would be a really fun fit, but I almost think that they have enough guys next year that can do that.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, you get into if three wide receivers go before the Jets pick, you almost think one of those top tackles that you'd want to pull trigger on would be there,
Yep,
or
exactly.
vice versa.
Yeah,
Right. So yeah, that'll be interesting. I mean, I would love to add one of these receivers for sure. I definitely, while am confident in our receiver room, and I think Mike Williams is a solid add, and I think he can be a wide receiver too. I do, when you think about who are the best receiving rooms in the league, I still don't think, Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams necessarily stacks up with,
right.
say a Jamar and a T. Higgins or a Jalen Waddle and a Tyreek, things like that.
Yep.
So yeah, that will be interesting. Um, and so I think the other conversation I want to have around your top 10, is seeing that guy Brock Bowers, the tight end at
Yeah.
number 5 on your
Yeah.
list. Because this is a super interesting talking point, and I still don't really know where I fall on it
I change my
because
mind every week.
sure, yeah. And before free agency, Blake and I were very much like, well, it's just not going to happen. We're not going to take him. We have too many holes. Now it seems like some of those holes are filled, and Brock Bowers to the Jets gaining a lot of steam. A lot of mock drafters are putting him there. A lot of people are talking about it, and it's very divisive, right? Some people think the Jets would be idiotic to take him. Some people think the Jets would be idiotic to pass on him if he's there. And I don't really know where I land. I mean, I feel very confident in the idea of taking a first round wide receiver, right? And I think that's something that if they want to go at 10 and take that guy, go for it. And I almost cringe at like, are we really just going to take a tight end? Like, what's that going to do? But when you do think about it in the fact of like, he's a pass catcher, right? And we almost have enough receivers with Williams and Lazard who can play in the slot, Garrett who can play in the slot. You obviously have Brownlee and Antonio Gibson, or not Antonio Gibson,
Uh,
right?
not to Sean Gibson, right?
This is fucked up. We're forgetting his name. I apologize. Um,
Is it doesn't am I thinking of a safety? Are you
Xavier
kidding me?
Gibson, excuse
Xavier.
me.
I'm thinking of the safety to Sean Gibson. Sorry. That was bad of
I'm sure
us.
he's fire too.
Hand up, we fucked up.
Hand up. Sorry, Xavier. We love you. But anyway, like the idea of drafting Brock Bowers, doesn't irk me the way it did before, and especially if he's, your fifth ranked player on the board,
Yeah.
you're adding a pass catcher, you're adding someone who can help with the offense, get more star players on the field who can make plays. I guess I just want your thoughts on where you stand right now with it, just because it is such an interesting discussion, and I feel like we both flip flop every day.
Yeah, yeah, because I think 2 weeks ago, before free agency, I was like, it can't be. We have too many needs at receiver and offensive line. Then they make all the signings, the Morgan Moses trade, and you're like, well, I guess if he's there at 10, it wouldn't be the worst thing to do. I flipped back recently, and I was listening to Connor Rogers over at Badlands, one of the best Jets guys out there. And the analogy he used with drafting Brock Bowers at 10, if you're the Jets, is it's like eating dessert first, before you have your meal. I think that we're getting into the idea that we are set here at wide receiver, we're set here at offensive line, and we may have, you know, put up a good solid foundation. We almost like every time we've talked about offensive line and wide receiver, we've said, okay, we might need more guys next year, and we 100% need more guys 2 years, 3 years from now. If things go well for the Jets here, we're not picking at 10. We are not going to get one of the
Sure.
top wide receivers or the top offensive linemen in the world. Tight end is one of those positions where, yes, there are great tight ends and they make a huge difference, but the Chiefs also have a top 5 defense, a great offensive line, and Patrick Mahomes. The 49ers have a great defense, Kyle Shanahan, really nice receivers, and George Kittle. The tight end is like the dessert. It can be the difference maker, but to me, the Jets aren't at a position yet where I'm like, I feel so secure on offensive line. I feel so secure on wide receiver. I might feel good heading into next year and a lot better than we did last year, but we're still talking about guys that are on like the final years of their contracts, 1 year deals, and they're also injury risk and a little bit older. So Brock Bowers would be awesome. He would be so fun. I think Aaron Rodgers would have a great time with him. Like you said, he can line up anywhere. He can play out wide. He can be in the slot. He can be an inline tight end. He's worked in the backfield. Like you can do so many fun things with him. But it, like Connor Rogers said, it feels like you're eating dessert before you've had your meal. And the Jets
Sure.
still have work to do on the offensive line and wide receiver room for things more than just beyond this year. And I think the Jets do need to be looking at 2024 because Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh both are on the hot seat, but you can't just think about next year because if next year is make or break and you're picking in the 20s or, fuck, let's say you get to pick 30, a guy like Olufashanu, Troy Fautanu, Brian Thomas Jr., Roma Dunze, they will not be available. Next
Yeah.
year's class this is a special class at those positions. So I think as fun as it would be to take Brock Bowers and just be like, look at all of these starters we've got, I think we also need to be building for the future and at a more important position at this point. So I've officially flip flop back. I probably will again and just be excited when they do it drafting. I'll be like, oh, that's fun. But
Yeah.
I'm more so just like I'd rather really feel good about my offensive line and wide receiver room than oh cool, we've also got this flashy tight end.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't disagree. And I do, I think there's obviously like if they do it, I would talk myself into it and I think
Of
that's
course.
fine.
Yeah.
What I'd like to avoid and I think last year is like a great case study to it is fans a lot of time, right? It's almost like you fill out your starters and that's all you think about,
Yeah.
right? And like last year, where there was lots of debates about like the receiver room, and it was like, okay, well, we kind of think our receiver room is all right. You have Corey Davis go down, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, our receiver
Yeah.
room is one good player and then a bunch of bad players, right?
Yep.
Like, and I personally still I'm very happy with the Mike Williams signing. I am, but I still do worry about this room. And exactly like you said, like is it the worst thing, even though it's a make or break year, to add a guy who maybe isn't going to start? Like I think that's something that fans need to move past. Obviously, I hear the arguments, right? We haven't been to the playoffs in 15 years or whatever. We need to win now. We need to actually get better now. Like I hear all that, but injuries are going to happen. Things are going to happen. Players are going to be in and out. Like whether it's O-line or receiver, I do anticipate that player playing, even if they're not a day one starter,
Hmm.
especially a receiver, because they're so easy to just work in. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think allowing yourself to think past 2024, right? Like right now, it's like, okay, well, why would we draft a receiver if we just signed Mike Williams and we're planning on, playing him and Garrett and then having Lazard in the slot and Gibson in the slot, like whatever. 1 year from now, you're not going to have Mike Williams anymore, right?
Yep.
And then all these other things are going to happen. Plus, if you can get an Odunze or who knows, a neighbor's probably not, but if he was there, it almost is like we'll pick that guy over Brock Bowers because that guy is really going to elevate your receiving room in a way that Brock Bowers, obviously good player, he'll get you better, but you almost feel like if we're sitting next year and it's like okay, we need to add a tight end, it almost just feels a little easier to get a guy you can trust, like a Conklin, right? Like I think Conklin's not the best player in the world. He's not a
No.
game breaker when it comes to his athleticism or anything like that, but he's solid and can be out there on the field and make plays for you. You almost don't feel that confident when you get into that range of guys with the receiver. So that would make me like, if the Jets want to add an offensive weapon, just go ahead and add a receiver opposed to Brock Bowers. So yeah, that's interesting, especially seeing him at number 5 on your list. Obviously a
Yeah.
very, very talented player. Um, is there a world he go, and this really doesn't have a ton to do with the Jets, I guess kind of, but does he go to a team before them? Like, would they be the first team that would take the shot based on their roster and things like that?
I would think so. I think every team
Yeah,
beforehand, like he doesn't seem like a fit for the tight end for Harbaugh at 5 with what they want to do. He'd be a good addition, but I don't think he fits like the mold of what they want out of tight ends there.
sure.
Tennessee is going to go offensive line most likely. They've added so much to the receiving room in free agency. Atlanta's got Kyle Pitts. Chicago at 9's got Cole Kmet, and I think they still would rather go either the top defensive player at that point or take another wide receiver. God forbid, if they took Roma Dunze, that would be a filthy trio. So yeah, I think the Jets are really where it starts. And after the Jets, I mean, I'm making out mock drafts where he's like falling to 18 in the Bengals. Like it's just unfortunately there are premium positions in the NFL and there are a lot of good players at those premium positions in this draft where you can be a top 5 player, but if you're a tight end, that's going to bump you down. And I think people are also scared away from drafting tight ends high, just like, they were with running backs recently. You've come to find out that you need to invest at quarterback, offensive line, wide receiver, edge, and maybe corner if you want to throw a fifth one in there. All the other positions are kind of secondary to that. And when you've got a class where you, those are the top positions, you're going to get a run on those in round one. And so I don't know. I think the Bowers conversation starts at 10, but it
Sure.
could go till the late teens even.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the bigger wild cards here in the draft coming up is
Definitely.
is where he's going to go. If the Jets take him again,
I'd be fine
I
with
don't
it.
think anyone will be pissed.
No,
Well, actually, that's a lie.
people
People
will be
certainly
pissed.
will be pissed. I don't
Yeah,
think
of
Blake
course.
or I will be pissed, but it's maybe
No,
not necessarily what we want.
right.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm mostly just kind of sticking in this, top pick that we have.
Yeah.
If there's stuff you want to add to about anything later. But this last kind of talking point, I just wanted to run by you. Not sure how serious you're going to take it. But after these, offensive line additions, that the Jets made in free agency. There's all of a sudden a few mock drafts that have come out, a few kind of people just bringing up the idea, hey, maybe the Jets really want to shore up that wide receiver room and they do something crazy like trade up to 4 or 5 and take a Marvin Harrison Jr. Which, you read that and you say, hey, if we could get a Marvin Harrison Jr., that'd be sick. He's really good.
Garrett
I
Wilson's your
guess
wide
my
receiver
question to
too. It'd
you,
be crazy. That'd be
it
awesome.
it would be crazy. It really would. My question to you is how realistic does that seem to you? I mean, to me, it doesn't seem realistic at all, especially with the picks that the Jets currently have.
Yeah.
Um,
I, I I don't think it's realistic at all. I just don't
yeah,
see them in a position where they look at their roster and say, "Oh yeah, we can afford to give up even if you wanted to go to the 2025 draft future selections to move up for a guy like that." I just that also feels like I'm saying like dessert before you eat. You need to have
sure.
depth at positions like offensive line and edge. Even outside of the older guys that you said, some guys are going to have signed with the Jets this offseason that will be bad next year. Like
Yeah,
it's happened every offseason. It happened with Lakin, it happened with Carl Lawson, it happened with Uzama. Like there are going to be guys, it happened with Lazard. Guys will come in and they won't perform up to the level we need them at. So to then also sacrifice whether it be I don't know how they would get the capital this year. You're most likely dealing with like a first or a second next year as well too. That to me gets really risky. It would be an all-in move from Joe Douglas. It would be like a hey 2024 and look, if you're drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors, it's not just for 2024, but it's very much like we are just going to try and be
yeah,
so undeniably good that you're really banking on the health and performance of all the guys you've brought in, which you should never do in free agency because it's never the best guys in the world that are available on that list. So
yeah.
it's fun seeing DJ, Daniel Jeremiah put out a mock like that, but I just can't get behind it and think it's realistic.
Yeah, and you almost like think about, the Cardinals have said they're open to trades at 4. I think
Hmm.
the Chargers have said they would at least listen to trades at 5. You
Yep.
think about like what teams would need to do to move up.
Yeah.
We talked about the Vikings, how they added pick 23, and that gives them, the Jets just don't have that, right? They
Mm-mm.
obviously have pick 10, but then, their next pick is 72. It just like something crazy would have to happen for them to have that capital. So I agree with you there,
Yeah.
but just, something that's been going around.
And the thing that's tough about that too is you pay way more to move up into the top 5 to select a quarterback. If
Right.
there was like
Yes.
Minnesota will beat any offer because they need a quarterback and they value that more than drafting a wide receiver at 5 to go along with Justin Jefferson for Sam Darnold to throw to. Like you're making that move to get a quarterback, so the cost of those picks, even though the Jet like now say that nobody makes an offer for to move up for a quarterback and the Jets are there and they're telling Arizona or they're telling the Chargers like, "Oh, we're coming up to take a wide receiver." The price does change, but the second one team wants a quarterback, the price of that pick goes up
Sure.
tenfold. So,
Sure.
I don't think I don't think it would be smart of the Jets to do, and I also don't think they have the capital to be able to afford to do so.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't disagree. I think, obviously, if you're gonna add a Marvin Harrison Jr. or maybe a shorter trade up to add a Malik Neighbors, like you're gonna get better. So it's not
Hmm.
like that would be like an insane move. It's just about, the capital that they'd have to give up and like whether they'd be actually willing to do that and whether a team would be willing to kind of make that deal, but then not get their benefits until the next season. And,
Right.
just a lot of things that seem in the way there. Um, so yeah, I mean, that was my main questions. I guess where I just want to end us again, just to ground us a little bit, the Jets' top four picks, number 10, then not to the third round, number 72, pick 111, then pick 135. Not a ton of premium picks, not a ton of day one and two picks. Um, I guess I just want to ask you one more time. We had this conversation. It seems like three quarterbacks are going to go in the top 10, potentially four. It does seem to me, at least, like whatever happens, there's going to be, one of the top two guys at either O line or receiver. And if not, it feels like at least the third best at one of those positions will be there. I
Hmm.
mean, you start doing the math. If three quarterbacks go, you know, and one other position goes, you almost have to have one of the three best at
Yeah.
O line or wide receiver available there. So it does seem like the Jets getting kind of one of those guys that we talked about at the beginning will be possible. So with that in mind, are you still team trade back in a vacuum, not fully sure what's going to happen? Would you prefer a move like that, or do you think getting, say, Roma Dunze or uh Fashanu, I believe was the one. Yeah,
Yeah.
or yeah, Fatanu. Um, where do you land there? I guess let's say that. Let's say Romo Dunze, Fatanu, and
Or trade back.
or trade back. What do you think?
I'd stick and take one of those two. I'd be more inclined to take Odunze at that point because there's just that's the best, and obviously he has to hit day one, but that's the best receiving core Aaron Rodgers will have ever had in his career. And he's played it with some great wide receivers. But if you go Garrett Wilson, Rome Odunze as the two, and then you've got, Mike Williams behind him to be a playmaker. You've got Alan Lazard, who he's worked a lot of time with. That to me is just like weapons
Your
galore.
three
And you're
receiver threat gets real
yeah,
strong there.
exactly. And you're not just and with Odunze, you're not just building for this Aaron Rodgers era, but you're also saying, okay, we're gonna be in like a Jamar Chase T. Higgins type duo where like a quarterback can slide in and Zach Wilson can get drafted and not have to throw to a bunch of nobodies for the first year of his career or struggle to make things work. That is a pretty sound way to fix bad quarterback play and a really
Sure.
great way to elevate elite quarterback play. So I would lean on that end. I would take Vitano as well too, because I can't like we are so emotionally scarred from the last few years of this offensive line. And to me, the one thing that could set this year back, if Aaron Rodgers is healthy, the thing that scares me more about the Jets is the offensive line staying healthy and strong as opposed to the receiver room. I do believe still that Aaron Rodgers is capable of making every receiver better around him. He's going to make Garrett Wilson better. He'll make Lazard better. Mike Williams will be better. He will do that himself. But he can't do that if the offensive line can't stand up and protect him. So I'm almost now talking myself back into I'd choose Fatanu first, Odunze two, just because like you can just with how bad the last few years have gone along the offensive line, and there have
Yeah,
been
I almost agree
stretches where
with
we
you.
got really excited about it. It's just like if Aaron Rodgers is running for his life at the age of 40, this will be a failed season. So you
Yeah,
need to make sure that you've got as much depth up front. And I think that that's something that the coaching staff and front office probably agree with too. I think Aaron Rodgers would agree with it as well too. I think they'd probably all be aligned. And you know, philosophically, Joe Douglas coming from Philadelphia, Baltimore beforehand, they just build and keep building, find the next wave of guys in the trenches. You know, Saleh over in San Francisco, we know how he loves to run that defense. To me, I just keep coming back to yes, they've got their starting five, but that starting five is only as good as the guys kind of behind it almost because as we saw
yeah,
last year, once the starters went down, the thing fell apart. Obviously, it fell apart with Rodgers, but like it really fell apart when we started to get O-line injuries. So yeah, I'd go Fatanu, which sucks passing up on a guy like Odunze, but if those two are there, I'd stay, take him, and like you got to sacrifice that you can't get a second rounder. Maybe there's another move you can make where you send 2025 picks up to get back in a day two, but I'd rather just take one of those guys and say,
sure.
let's just make sure this thing goes well next year.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess just to wrap up my thoughts, um, obviously who the Jets pick will depend on their big board and depend on kind of where they land on guys and how they rank guys at these positions. But just with the depth, it seems like there are at the positions that they want. I almost do think that just staying at 10 and making the pick seems like the more likely scenario, just because it seems like there will be a guy there that's high up on their board that they'll want to not pass up on. Um, but yeah, we'll have to wait and see. It'll be interesting.
It's the best. I love this draft
It
stuff. Even
is.
this conversation. I mean,
Yeah.
we went probably a lot longer than we thought we were going to for today. We talked about it probably being a shorter pod, but um, this is better to get into, I think, the name specifically and to take a look at as opposed to just saying positionally, trade back, trade
Yep.
partners. Like we did a good job going in and being like, what would you do in this situation? What are these type of players bringing to the offense? So yeah, it's a really exciting conversation. We'll probably the next few weeks are going to be really interesting trying to figure out ways to talk about the draft in newer forms. You know, we'll obviously try and do a Jets mock draft on like a mock draft simulator to go through things. But I think this is a really good focus because it's tough to talk about the depth and round two players to be excited for when you don't have a second round pick. So we really just
Right.
have to talk about what to do up here. And then, like, look, I'll be honest with you, I'm going to get 150 players out there, but picks in the
Where
fourth,
they're going to
fifth,
be
sixth, and
picked.
seventh round, it's
Yeah,
like, who the fuck knows what we're going to be
for
talking about
sure.
at that point? I'm not
For
going to
sure.
pretend to know that stuff.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I would like the Jets to add a second, but I would
It's going to be
prefer that
tough.
to somehow come without giving up pick number 10. So
Yeah, it's at least hey, at least we got the first. At least outside of
I
Rodgers,
know
being
that's the
down for the
one beauty.
season, it'd be tough if this season went as poorly as it did, and we had to start at pick
42.
42.
Yeah.
That'd be
Yeah.
crazy. That would be bad. Cool. All right. Well, really fun pod, really long pod. Thank you guys for listening so much to another episode of Keeping Up with the New York Jets. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at KUWTNYJ. Teddy is at Teddy Huncho. I am at Spring Blake with 4 A's in there. Fun update real quick. I got the at Spring Blake with no extra A's in there. I got that account removed, but they're not allowing me to retake the name. So it's just like no
Damn.
one's allowed to have it right now. But hopefully one day I can.
Hopefully soon you'll get the
I keep
1A.
reaching out to Twitter support. I'm like, hey, can you just, what are you doing with that? Can I have it? Give it to
Can I
me.
have it, please?
Thank you guys for listening. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.